फ्रेंड्स, आज हमारे साथ प्रोफेसर लॉरेंस साइमन ब्रांडाइज यूनिवर्सिटी यूएसए के हैं। मैं उनके बारे में थोड़ा सा आपको बताना चाहूँगा कि लॉरेंस साइमन ब्रांडाइज यूनिवर्सिटी हेलर स्कूल में प्रोफेसर है सोशल पॉलिसी के। ब्रांडाइज यूनिवर्सिटी की अपनी एक हिस्ट्री है। ब्रांडाइज यूनिवर्सिटी हार्वर्ड सिटी में है, बॉस्टन में, और हार्वर्ड आपको मालूम है कि नंबर 1 या 2 यूनिवर्सिटी है इन द वर्ल्ड। तो उस ज़माने में, मैं अर्ली पीरियड की बात कर रहा हूँ, कि जूज जो स्टूडेंट है जूज ग्रुप के, वो टॉप रैंक में रहते थे एडमिशन के लिए, और ब्रिटिश और इंग्लिश पीपल को एडमिशन उतनी नहीं मिलती थी, तो उन्होंने जूस के लिए कोटा रखा और इसके वजह से उनको लिमिटेड एडमिशन मिलती थी। इसलिए उन्होंने सोचा कि अपनी अलग से यूनिवर्सिटी हो। उस यूनिवर्सिटी बनाने में आइंस्टाइन का भी रोल था। वो आइंस्टाइन ऑल्सो वन ऑफ द फाउंडर ऑफ दिस यूनिवर्सिटी। यहाँ साइमन लॉरेंस पढ़ाते हैं इस यूनिवर्सिटी में, और उनके स्कूल में उनकी वजह से माइनॉरिटी और सोशल ग्रुप पे काफ़ी फोकस है। उन्होंने पिछले 15 साल में दलितों के लिए काम किया है। पहले शुरू में उन्होंने दलित स्टूडेंट को उनके स्कूल में आकर्षित करने के लिए फेलोशिप और फाइनेंशियल असिस्टेंट दी। उसके बाद उन्होंने एक ग्लोबल सेंटर फॉर सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट खोला, उसमें सोशल एक्सक्लूजन का थीम लाया रिसर्च के लिए और पढ़ाने के लिए। कोर्सेज भी पढ़ाते हैं कास्ट के इशू को लेके। उसके बाद उन्होंने एक तय किया कि एक कॉन्फ्रेंस करेंगे डॉक्टर अम्बेडकर के नाम पे, जिसका टाइटल उन्होंने दिया है अनफिनिश्ड लेगेसी ऑफ डॉक्टर अम्बेडकर। और हर 2 साल के बाद वो कॉन्फ्रेंस बाबा साहब के ऊपर ऑर्गेनाइज करते हैं। इस साल वो कॉन्फ्रेंस जो होगी वो लॉ एंड कास्ट पे होगी। हमारे चीफ जस्टिस जो है चंद्रचूड़, वो उसको इनॉग्रेट करने के लिए आएंगे। उसके बाद उन्होंने कास्ट का जर्नल निकाला, ग्लोबल जर्नल ऑफ सोशल एक्सक्लूजन, जिसमें यूएसए में जो इशू है कास्ट का, उसका प्रचार होता है। उसके बाद उन्होंने ये जर्नल के थ्रू काफ़ी कुछ प्रचार किया कास्ट के इशू को। लेकिन जो कास्ट का इशू हायर एजुकेशन इंस्टीट्यूशन में और कंपनी में कास्ट डिस्क्रिमिनेशन का इशू उभर आया दलितों के बारे में, तब उन्होंने इंटरवीन किया। बॉस्टन ब्रांडाइज ऐसी एक यूनिवर्सिटी है कि जिन्होंने अपने कोड में ये लिखा कि वो रेस के साथ साथ कास्ट डिस्क्रिमिनेशन को भी वो कंसिडर करेंगे। तो इस तरह की उनकी हिस्ट्री है। इतना इम्पॉर्टेंट महत्वपूर्ण आदमी जिन्होंने पिछले 20 साल में दलित कास्ट इशू और बाबा साहब की मूवमेंट, इसके प्रति काम किया है। तो हमने सोचा कि उनके साथ आज डिस्कशन हो। वेलकम वंस अगेन डॉक्टर लॉरेंस साइमन। I have introduced you to the audience to the extent possible,
right.
But let me begin with you the first point or first question. I would like to sort of request you to reflect on your own activities till you came to JNU with a proposal that you would like to attract Dalit student to Heller School for admission, provide some financial assistance. Now, what is the background of this? What is really motivated you to identify what is the Dalit problem and to help them?
Thank you, Professor Thorat. I guess to answer your question, I would have to talk a little bit about my own family's history.
Please.
You know, I was born right after the end of World War II. And in the Jewish world, World War II, of course, was absolutely devastating, right?
Yeah.
And I was born just weeks after the last of the concentration camps, the death camps, were liberated. Now, I was born in New York, so of course, happily, my own immediate family was not directly affected by the Nazis. But the larger community of Jews, and even some of our family who never came to the United States, suffered enormous problems, obviously genocide. But it wasn't just an event. What I became more aware of as I grew into adolescence and into young adulthood was that the genocide was 2,000 years in making, that the oppression that the Jewish community in Eastern Europe in particular felt had always been there, had always been oppressive, had always been murdering Jewish communities. And so I became very conscious, I suppose, of the very issue of what it means over history to live in communities or with identities that are hated, become scapegoats for others' ambitions, or mythologies about who the people are. So I think that's very much part of it. The other is that I grew up in a lower middle class family in New York City. And I remember my father, when I was quite young, maybe about 10 years old, he had worked for 25 years for one company, a hardware manufacturing company in New York. And it was a small company, and his boss passed away quickly, right away. And my father was not young at that time. I can remember sitting on the edge of his bed at night, terribly worried whether we would fall into poverty. Now, he would never have said that to me, but I could tell how worried he was, and whether at his age he could easily make a transition to another company to do the type of work that he did. And it left me with a sense that of vulnerability within a family, within a group of people who love each other and want to do well in the country and the world, but how easy it seemed to be for people to fall apart, for their status to be diminished very quickly because of an event that he had no life, he had no a pension or anything of that sort. So all of these issues became very much in my mind as I grew into young adulthood and began to think about what my career would be. I'm not sure I articulated it in those terms at that age, but it was very clear to me that I wanted somehow to work on problems of social exclusion and the violence that often comes against people who are marginalized. So at one point, I began work, really kind of the first real organization I started to work for was Oxfam America, one of the many Oxfams around the world. And we were a small group in those years, and I worked in different parts of the world for Oxfam, including South Asia. So in South Asia, particularly Sri Lanka, but also some in India, I became very much aware of the problems of social cohesion. And as we know, in Sri Lanka, not that many years later, a war broke out for 28 years between two ethnicities, and misunderstandings and tremendous violence in this small neighboring country to where we are today, right? But also in India, even with Oxfam, we had begun to fund some Dalit organizations.
Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah.
And then after
it began with that. Yeah.
In terms of my understanding, or to begin to understand caste issues here in this country and in Sri Lanka, that's where it really began, I think.
Yeah.
That's true. But I think my sensitivity to those issues of social exclusion was much deeper.
I understand that.
Much deeper.
Yeah, but then when you came to Heller School and you wanted to help the Dalit student to come, and you printed those forms and the information, and you came to Delhi and you met me. Yeah. That was a special initiative. Will you tell in a minute or so about this?
That visit was a very special point in my life because I knew your name, of course, from these issues. But it seemed to me that I needed to come to talk to somebody who had the kind of extraordinary network and deep understanding of these issues to help guide us, not only in terms of identifying prospective candidates for tuition scholarships, but also guide me and my group. And so that was a beginning of a fabulous collaboration and friendship right till today, of course.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But the work that I began to do at Brandeis, of course, was also, I think, a kind of a natural succession to when I left Oxfam, I started an organization called the American Jewish World Service. And we did very specifically fund Dalit organizations in South Asia, particularly India, of course. And in fact, I'm aware that they are still funding. In fact, next week when I'm in Delhi, I'll be going to visit one or two organizations that are being funded by the American Jewish, but Dalit leadership organizations. So
Okay, thank you.
Youth organizations.
Yeah, thank you. मैंने प्रोफेसर साइमन लॉरेंस को ये पूछा था कि उन्होंने जो दलित विद्यार्थियों को उनकी स्कूल में लाने के लिए जो इनिशिएटिव लिया और कास्ट और डॉक्टर बाबा साहेब अम्बेडकर के बारे में उन्होंने सोचा और काम करने की बात की, तो उसका मोटिवेशन क्या था ये मैंने उनको पूछा। तो उन्होंने उसके दो कारण बताए। एक तो यह है कि लॉरेंस साइमन जो है वो जू है और उनका जन्म जो है लगभग सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर जब ख़त्म होने को आया उस पीरियड में हुआ, न्यूयॉर्क में हुआ, यूएसए में। लेकिन वो एज ए चाइल्ड वो एक विटनेस थे कि जो जेनोसाइड यूरोप में हुआ जू के प्रति, मिलियंस ऑफ जूज वेर ऑफ कोर्स टेकन आउट इन कंसंट्रेशन कैंप इन पोलैंड एंड इन जर्मनी। तो ये वो उसका विटनेस थे और ये अनुभव जो है उन्होंने एज ए जू कम्युनिटी, एज ए डिस्क्रिमिनेटेड कम्युनिटी खुद उन्होंने एक्सपीरियंस किया। तो वो जो संवेदना है माइनॉरिटी डिस्क्रिमिनेट कम्युनिटी की, वो उनके अपने पर्सनल लाइफ का एक्सपीरियंस है। इसलिए दलितों का दलितों की जो समस्या है, जो डिस्क्रिमिनेशन से एक्सक्लूजन से सपोर्ट होते हैं, उसके बारे में लगा होना ये स्वाभाविक था। एक तो ये कारण था। दूसरा कारण था कि उन्होंने पढ़ने के बाद, वैसे वो लोअर मिडिल क्लास फैमिली से आए, संघर्ष किया, अपना करियर बनाया, लेकिन वो ऑक्सफैम में उन्होंने काम करना शुरू कर दिया। ऑक्सफैम इज अ फंडिंग एजेंसी विच सपोर्ट सिविल सोसाइटी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन एंड एनजीओज। तो वो ये बता रहे थे कि उन्होंने उस वक्त भी दलित ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को फंडिंग की दलित कॉज के लिए। तो मेरा ख्याल है दलित कॉज की सेंसिटिविटी उनमें काफ़ी शुरू से है। और जब वो बर्नाइज यूनिवर्सिटी में आए, हेलर स्कूल ऑफ पब्लिक पॉलिसी में, तो वहाँ पर भी उन्होंने फिर उसी संवेदना के साथ वो आए। तो उन्होंने एक इनिशिएटिव लिया कि दलित लड़के आने चाहिए यहाँ पर, उनको फाइनेंशियल सपोर्ट देना चाहिए। तो वहाँ उन्होंने वो एक प्रोग्राम शुरू किया। उसी को लेके वो दिल्ली आए थे, मुझे मिले, वो एक पॉम्पलेट प्रिंट करके आए जहाँ दलित स्टूडेंट के लिए स्कॉलरशिप मिलेगी, एडमिशन मिलेगी, और उसको इन्फॉर्मेशन देने के लिए वो दिल्ली में आए। उससे उनकी इंटेंसिटी आपको पता चल जाती है। तो हमें बड़ी खुशी है कि वो हमारे साथ है आज, और नागपुर यूनिवर्सिटी में जाएंगे, दीक्षा भूमि दिखेंगे। प्रोफेसर लॉरेंस साइमन, आई कम टू दी सेकंड क्वेश्चन इज दैट आई थिंक and I am a sort of witness to it कि आपने जब ग्लोबल सेंटर फॉर सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट बनाया हेलर स्कूल में, तो उसमें आप ऑन पर्पस यू पुट ए थीम ऑफ सोशल एक्सक्लूजन, कास्ट एक्सक्लूजन एंड सोशल एक्सक्लूजन. So you included the social exclusion as a part of the Global Center for Sustainable Development. That was a major thing because on that platform then number of activity came up. Occasionally the theme for teaching and research became focus on Dalit and the issue of caste discrimination. But I think most important outcome of that initiative of yours was to set up a program whereby you decided to have a conference within 2 years and name it as Unfinished Legacy of Dr. Ambedkar. And you have organized so far, the Heller School has organized so far 5 conferences. And then the another remarkable achievement was, of course, starting of journal, a global journal for social exclusion studies. So could you sort of reflect on this? How did you sort of get motivated to include social exclusion in the Global Sustainable Development Program? Came with an idea of understanding Dr. Ambedkar and organizing conferences, feeling that the issue is still there and the desire to start the journal. I also remember that I had brought from Delhi those bulky 17 volumes of the entire writing of Ambedkar. So you had access to that.
I do have them.
Yeah. Could you sort of reflect on this?
Yes. Well, I think the activities that you mentioned, of course, have become a very important part, not only of our Center on Global Development and Sustainability, but I think even at the university, because it's really helped to focus within the university a study and research on particularly on South Asia. The university itself was clearly the right choice for this work, because going back again in history for just a moment, Brandeis itself was founded in 1948, very soon after the end of World War II. And at that time, most of the best universities in the United States, the Ivy League schools and others, admitted students largely on the basis of race and ethnicity, and excluded others who weren't white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So it wasn't just Jews, it was Italian Americans if they were Catholic, or Irish Americans, or African Americans, Asian Americans. And so I know you mentioned this a little bit in your introduction. The Jewish community in the United States, when they began to do a little bit better after World War II, and with notable colleagues like Albert Einstein, who was one of the early supporters, decided that they would begin a university that maybe was sponsored originally by the Jewish community, but would be a non-sectarian university, meaning essentially that we would challenge all of the universities that are excluding people based on race, ethnicities, religion, and so color, and create a university that would rise rapidly as it did as a top research university, but would admit students purely on the basis of merit. And as you know from your visits to Brandeis, it's a global community of all nations and all religions and all ethnicities, people of all shades of the rainbow, if you will. And so when I raised the issue at the university of focusing some of our work, not the whole university, but focusing our work on social exclusion, particularly on caste issues in South Asia, it was such a natural extension of what the university felt that was in its DNA already. Okay. So the work that we began on the conferences, as you mentioned, they each had a theme, but the sub-theme of the unfinished legacy of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. That was a very important work for us because it was research-oriented, right? We wanted to adhere in our social exclusion work to the idea that we are a university. We're not a policy advocacy group per se, although the work we do obviously has policy implications. But we wanted to help to encourage in the United States, among other universities, and particularly South Asian studies programs that are all over the place, an increasing focus on these issues of social exclusion. And so the conferences were the sort of the ideal way to begin that. The journal was a natural outgrowth of conferences, because if the conferences were meant to help encourage research in America and elsewhere, of course, but particularly in America, where caste research, caste studies was almost unheard of in most universities in the United States at that time, we knew that to begin a university level journal, because it's done in collaboration with the Brandeis Library, a journal that would be a peer-reviewed journal, open access, so that there are no subscription fees. You know, an undergraduate at JNU or at TIS or anywhere else in India or anywhere in the world could access journals, the journal articles, download articles with no fees at all. And that we had an aim to be able to publish very distinguished senior researchers in addition to young PhD students also. Do you know what I mean? If the quality of their work was such that we considered it important to give them some voice. And of course, then that led to the creation of the annual, what we call the Bluestone, named after.
I was going to mention that Bluestone award.
It's named after a donor who was very, very interested in the work on social exclusion worldwide, who left a bequest to the university to sustain both scholarships as well as research. And so that became then the Bluestone Rising Scholar Prize, so that we have identified every year now, we have a call for papers for the submissions for the prize, and the people that have been selected have had tremendous career impacts.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Friends, मैंने प्रोफेसर लॉरेंस साइमन को पूछा था कि हेलर स्कूल में वो आने के बाद उन्होंने जो ग्लोबल सेंटर फॉर सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट बनाया, उसमें एक थीम सोशल एक्सक्लूजन का उन्होंने रखा, और उसके बाद उन्होंने कुछ रिसर्च प्रमोट किया, टीचिंग प्रमोट की, और उसके दो आउटकम हैं। एक आउटकम तो ये है कि उन्होंने डॉक्टर बाबा साहेब अम्बेडकर के नाम पे हर 2 साल के बाद कॉन्फ्रेंस रखी, जिसका नाम दिया उन्होंने अनफिनिश्ड लीगेसी ऑफ डॉक्टर बाबा साहेब अम्बेडकर। जो बाबा साहेब अम्बेडकर का अधूरा काम रहा है, वो क्यों है, कैसे है, इसके ऊपर हर 2 साल के बाद कॉन्फ्रेंस होती है। अब 5वीं कॉन्फ्रेंस होगी। उसके बाद उन्होंने एक कास्ट का जर्नल, ऑनलाइन जर्नल निकाला है, ग्लोबल जर्नल फॉर ऑन सोशल एक्सक्लूजन। उसके बाद तीसरा इनिशिएटिव उनका ये है कि ब्लू स्टोन अवार्ड दिया है इमर्जिंग स्कॉलर, जो यंग स्कॉलर है उनके लिए। और ज़्यादातर मैंने ये देखा है कि जो कास्ट के इशू पे जो लिखते हैं बच्चे, उनको अवार्ड वो मिलता है। तो ये उनका ऑब्वियसली ये सारे जो एक्टिविटी उन्होंने ब्रांडाइज यूनिवर्सिटी में की है, उसके पीछे भी उनका जो डिस्क्रिमिनेटेड ग्रुप के प्रति जो लगाव है, जो इंटरेस्ट है, उसका एक कारण है। उसके बैकग्राउंड में उन्होंने ये बताया था कि अमेरिका में ब्रांडाइज यूनिवर्सिटी सेटअप होने के पहले, हार्वर्ड यूनिवर्सिटी हो या और यूनिवर्सिटी हो, वहाँ ज़्यादा इंग्लिश लोगों को प्रायोरिटी देते थे एडमिशन वगैरह में, और जो माइनॉरिटीज़ है, जूस है, लैटिनो है और है, इनको कम प्रायोरिटी एडमिशन में मिलती थी। इसलिए उन्होंने वो ब्रांडाइज यूनिवर्सिटी बनाई। ये नॉन सेक्टेरियन यूनिवर्सिटी है, लेकिन बनाई जू लोगों ने अपना पैसा लगा के। जैसे मैंने कहा था कि आइंस्टाइन भी उसके एक फाउंडिंग मेंबर थे, और इसमें डाइवर्सिफाइड तरीके से स्टूडेंट आते हैं डिफरेंट कंट्रीज से, वह आपको देखने को मिलता है। तो ये जो 3 इनिशिएटिव उन्होंने लिए है, वो बहुत ज़बरदस्त इनिशिएटिव है। एनुअल कॉन्फ्रेंस होती है, और जर्नल जो है उसका अब इतना प्रचार हुआ है कि मेरा ख्याल है लगभग 3000 रेगुलर व्यूअर है उस जर्नल के, और उसमें अच्छा मटेरियल कास्ट के ऊपर अमेरिका में आता है। तो ये उनका बहुत बड़ा रोल है ब्रांडाइज यूनिवर्सिटी की तरफ से। प्रोफेसर Laurence Simon, now let me come to the last and perhaps important question is that you are here to give a lecture, Nitin Raut lecture in Nagpur University, and the theme of your lecture is that Ambedkarite and Ambedkarism and the issue of caste discrimination in USA. Yeah. The Ambedkarite groups and the Ambedkarite idea that they propagate in the USA, and that they have taken the issues of caste discrimination in USA, also legal intervention, fighting for recognition of caste as one of the aspect of non-discrimination. Yes. And Brandeis is, as I understand, is the first university which has included in the code. So would you share with us your views on how are Ambedkarite doing in USA, how they are pushing up the agenda of Ambedkarism, their content, and then the initiative that they have taken initiative that Brandeis has taken, you have taken to bring the caste on the court.
Yes.
Could you share with us about that?
Absolutely, Professor. I think this came about largely because of the tuition scholarships that you had helped us to bring students to Brandeis coming from Dalit backgrounds. And it became clear to me when they settled into Brandeis that that they had two major reactions, I think, when they settled into to life in America, if you will, and particularly at the university. One was a fair number of them said to me that they felt wonderful about being anonymous. It's a powerful idea. Do you mean that they felt that for the first time in their lives, they could sit with anybody else and just be a student, not be a Dalit student, or not in the cafeteria or in some event, not always being identified by somebody as being something that they may be proud of, but still in the eyes of the others may be something that would be socially excluding. Okay. When I became aware of that, because the other reaction, of course, that they had was that they felt that when other students, that is, other students from India or Nepal or a high caste from wherever, found out what their identities were, they felt that conversations just stopped. That it was kind of a process of shunning, of distancing them from being distanced, right? Being the othered.
In Brandeis.
Even inside Brandeis, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But we certainly began to realize that this was not just at Brandeis. I mean, because we now have in the United States very large numbers of students coming in from not only all over the world, but very much from India.
Yeah.
And so I became more aware of the fact that this is an issue here. Okay. That brought me into a greater understanding of Ambedkarite groups, particularly Ambedkarite Buddhist organizations throughout North America. Because when we began our international conferences that you've mentioned, we began to attract Ambedkarite organizations, not university groups necessarily, but just in the communities, in the cities.
I remember in the first conference we invited Ambedkar International Mission, Raju Kamble.
Yes, the great and late and wonderful man. Yes, and so that gave me a much better understanding of the network out there, because among the American Indian population, that is from India, who had come here as immigrants and settled in the United States, Buddhists, according to some data I found, is only 1% of Indian immigrants. Okay, and many of them, if not most of them, would be self-described as Ambedkarite Buddhists. Okay? So that's an important group. And when my students, who were brought in with tuition scholarships, began to reach out to them as a community, a larger community outside of the university, I became very much aware of how important the Ambedkarite groups are in the United States. They may be small, but they're networks all over the United States and Canada even. And that was, and they have all participated meaningfully, very much so in our international conferences. They've been an incredible support for immigrant students, for students who have come from India with Dalit or tribal backgrounds, to feel that there was a larger community of support for them and understanding for them. So that I think was very, very important for us.
मैंने सवाल पूछा था प्रोफेसर साइमन लॉरेंस को कि उनको जो अमेरिका में जो अम्बेडकराइट ग्रुप्स है उनके साथ उनका संबंध कैसे आया, और फिर जो अमेरिका में जो दलित है उन्होंने जो कास्ट डिस्क्रिमिनेशन का इशू लिया, वो उनके बारे में वो कैसा उन्होंने प्रयत्न किया। तो उनका ये कहना था कि जब उन्होंने जो एनुअल कॉन्फ्रेंस अम्बेडकर साहब के बारे में जो कॉन्फ्रेंस शुरू की थी ऑन द थीम ऑफ अनफिनिश्ड लीगेसी ऑफ डॉक्टर अम्बेडकर, तो उस कॉन्फ्रेंस में जो रिसर्चर थे उनको तो हमने बुलाया ही बुलाया, लेकिन साथ साथ जो अमेरिका में जो अम्बेडकराइट ग्रुप थे छोटे छोटे, उनको भी बुलाया और वो धीरे धीरे इंटरेस्ट लेने लगे। जैसे कि बॉस्टन में बॉस्टन ग्रुप है, न्यूयॉर्क में अम्बेडकर इंटरनेशनल मिशन है। पहले कॉन्फ्रेंस जो बॉस्टन में हुई उसमें राजू कामले आए थे, डॉक्टर बाबा साहेब के अम्बेडकर की किताबें लेके उन्होंने वहाँ डिस्प्ले किया है। तो धीरे धीरे लॉरेंस साइमन ये कह रहे हैं कि ये सारे जो छोटे छोटे ग्रुप है लेकिन इफेक्टिव ग्रुप है, उनके बारे में उनसे जानकारी मिली। लेकिन सबसे बड़ी बात उन्होंने जो कही वो ये है कि वो ग्रुप ही नहीं थे, लेकिन वो एक आइडियोलॉजी से प्रभावित हुए थे। वो अम्बेडकराइट थे, डॉक्टर अम्बेडकर की जो आइडियोलॉजी है, जो विचारधारा है, उससे प्रभावित थे और उसी से मोटिवेट होकर वो काम करते थे। कुछ हद तक जो ब्रांडाइज स्कूल में, ब्रांडाइज यूनिवर्सिटी में जो लड़के आए, वो उसमें भी वो उस विचारधारा के लड़के थे। तो इस तरह उनका जो संबंध जो है, वो जो लार्जर अम्बेडकराइट मूवमेंट यूएसए में है, उनके साथ हुआ। मैं आपको ये भी बता दूं कि अब कनाडा में एक डिस्कशन हुआ था, तो उन्होंने ब्रांडाइज को, उनको लॉरेंस साइमन को बुलाया ऑन रेडियो। उन्होंने डिस्कशन किया कास्ट डिस्क्रिमिनेशन इन कनाडा, तो उनको बुलाया क्योंकि उनको कनाडा लोगों को पता चल गया कि लॉरेंस साइमन जो है ब्रांडाइज के थ्रू कास्ट इश्यू के लिए और दलितों के लिए कितना काम कर रहे हैं। तो इस तरह से आज की स्थिति में लॉरेंस साइमन एक अम्बेडकराइट मूवमेंट जो है यूएसए में, उसका एक तरीके से हिस्सा बने हैं। तो ये हमें बड़ी खुशी की बात है कि एक अमेरिकन जो है अम्बेडकराइट मूवमेंट में जुड़ा हुआ है और काम कर रहा है। Lawrence Simon, I'll ask a last question now. That you are involved into this issue of caste discrimination, and that the Brandeis University was the first university to have included the caste code. Yes. And then it was followed by a couple of other universities, I think Harvard, California. Now the local government have also said Seattle has included, and California is trying, I think, there's a lot of opposition by the Hindu organization. Would you share with us the initiative by the Brandeis and your initiative? And then some of the cases are there which are taken to the court. You are also involved and people are consulting you. So if you could share about your involvement, and also lastly at the end, if you could say that what is the future, what is the way forward for the issue of caste in USA.
So the work that we began to do on caste discrimination in higher education began because of the experience, as I had mentioned a while ago, of our own students feeling excluded or distanced or othered by some other high caste students on campus. I began to articulate within the university the issues of caste discrimination and recognize that almost all Americans and almost all university administrators and faculty and even other students, if they are not of South Asian background, have just the foggiest idea what caste means. And if they know something about caste over there, they think it's something just in history, not realizing what a potent force it still is. So I began to describe it as a very real discrimination in America. I focused on higher education, so I can't really comment more in terms of the whole society. But I began to describe it as a hidden discrimination right here on our own campuses. So at the time of the third international conference, which you spoke at, we had both a new president of the university who came to the conference to help open it, and for the first time hired a senior vice president for diversity, equity, and inclusion, Mark Brimho-Vargas. And at the end of the conference, Dr. Vargas, Brimho-Vargas, came to me and said, "My goodness," he said, I think I have considered myself an expert on all forms of social exclusion and had never thought about caste issues.
Yeah.
Right? And he then suggested, when he learned about the experience of our own students, that we begin a university-wide task force and that he and I would co-chair it. And so for the next months, probably I think it was 8 or 9 months, the task force members that were made up of faculty, administrators, staff, and students, we invited any member of the Brandeis community at any level to come and talk with any member of the task force, because we knew we couldn't hold public hearings and expect people to come and out themselves and things like this.
Yeah.
And so at the end of that period, we had admittedly anecdotal information, but enough to feel that we really should talk with the university now about incorporating it into our non-discrimination policies. So we spoke with our general counsel and then crafted the policy, and the president approved it. What I think is important about it is not so much that we were the first university in North America to do so, but that its impact was on many other universities, particularly because of the embedcrite groups in the neighborhood of the universities that said, wow, look at this the first university to incorporate caste into its non-discrimination policies. Why aren't you doing it? Why aren't you doing it at many other universities around the country? And we began to receive many inquiries from other university faculty and administrators about why we did it, and then how did we do it. And you are right that since then there are probably maybe around 30, 35 campuses elsewhere in the United States, including Harvard is the most recent one, just literally days ago incorporated caste as a university-wide non-discrimination policy. And even UCal, University of California, system, which is 22 campuses, that right up to the chancellor's office incorporated into all the campuses of California State University, not the University of California, which is Berkeley and so forth, right?
Also Brown?
Brown, yes. Brown was the first of the Ivy Leagues to incorporate some months ago. And as I mentioned, Harvard just did it now, which we're very pleased at that. So it took on a kind of life as a kind of a social movement, if you will, focused on caste. And I think the value of it is not only the protection that it creates, that it provides for against caste discrimination, protection for any individual who is subjected or was perceived to be subjected to social exclusion based on caste, but it has raised the issue of caste in the public sphere.
Yeah,
in the public sphere, and also increasingly, as we began the journal for the same reason, to raise to project the idea that caste is worthy, is important and worthy of academic research, right? And so both these things, the journal and the recognition that caste discrimination exists, and it probably exists on your campus, but you don't see it because one doesn't have background at all to see it. You don't have the right lens to see it.
Also from university to the employees, the Crick's case.
To employees too, absolutely.
You were sort of consulted on that, and
yes, to some extent, yes. There is, as you mentioned, there is growing and quite vocal opposition to the incorporation caste at universities, and maybe particularly in city councils and at the state of California, the city of Seattle, as you mentioned, in the state of Washington, the city council incorporated caste as a protected category under their non-discrimination policy. So it's the first city in the country to do so.
Seattle or?
Seattle, in the state of Washington.
State of Washington.
Right, but California, there is some effort now in the state government to incorporate it, to recognize caste. But as I say, someone the other day, I was on a webinar on these issues, and a PhD student at the University of Michigan said, and I think she was absolutely right, that caste is being weaponized now. Weaponized is a very important word, because it isn't just an academic discussion, an academic debate, or anything like that. It's becoming the focus of direct attacks on organizations, whether city councils or universities, who are trying to move this forward. And I think most social movements for emancipation or for social inclusion at some point hit that type of increasing opposition to what they are actually achieving. But the opposition is emerging because we are achieving significant results in terms of the spread of the idea that it's not just a hidden discrimination, it is there.
Let me just add one question is that, the justification that they are giving, that we are identified, and so what do you think of their justification? When we talk of racial discrimination, we also identify the whites. When we talk of gender discrimination, we also identify the male.
Absolutely.
So what is unique about Hindu that they are identified when the caste discrimination is mentioned?
So we at Brandeis, and this is very strongly my own view, we are a little, because we are a Jewish-sponsored university, though, as I said, completely non-sectarian, I'm very careful in our critique of caste to say that it's a social exclusion that is found in other religions also, which is, I think, whatever its origins were here in South Asia. Because one of the major critics or criticisms that are leveled against the universities and city councils now is that you're targeting a religion, right? That you're targeting Hinduism or whatever, or you're targeting individuals. And my response is no, we're not targeting anybody. One could carry out, the analysis a little further than saying that people are protected against racial discrimination. One can then ask the question, well, who is discriminating against them, right? And so you can certainly carry that to white supremacy, very easily make that point, right?
Certainly. When you talk of racial discrimination, it comes to white.
It comes to white supremacy, absolutely so. But incorporating caste at a city council or incorporating caste in a university as a protected characteristic of a person, right, is not targeting anybody. It's protecting somebody. And it's not saying that there are individuals at that university that have to be thrown out or something like that.
No.
Because in many cases, for instance, at Brandeis, when we had our task force, all of the reports, admittedly anecdotal, that came to our task force were all about student-on-student issues. Right? There was never an allegation of a university professor, maybe a high caste professor or something, or an administrator. There was never one even allegation of discrimination at that level. Okay. Now, whether it is there may be some of that elsewhere, I can't say, of course.
Thank you. मैंने प्रोफेसर लॉरेंस साइमन को ये पूछा था कि आज जो मूवमेंट चल रही है यूएसए में कि जैसे कि रेशियल जेंडर डिस्क्रिमिनेशन विद कलर, इसके अगेंस्ट में कायदा है, कोर्ट्स है वहाँ पे, उसमें कास्ट को भी इंक्लूड किया जा रहा है, क्योंकि यूएसए में हाई कास्ट पॉपुलेशन भी है, दलित पॉपुलेशन, लो कास्ट पॉपुलेशन भी है। और डॉक्टर अंबेडकर ने प्रिडिक्ट किया था कि जहाँ भी हिंदू जाएगा वो अपने साथ कास्ट ले जाएगा, तो कास्ट का प्रॉब्लम जो है वो ग्लोबल बनेगा। तो आज बिल्कुल सही है कि कास्ट का प्रॉब्लम जो है वो ग्लोबल बना है। मैंने पूछा था उनको कि ब्रांडाइज यूनिवर्सिटी ने कैसे इनिशिएटिव किया, तो उनका ये कहना था कि उनके जो प्रेसिडेंट थे उन्होंने इनिशिएटिव लिया। हार्वर्ड यूनिवर्सिटी में इनिशिएटिव चल रहा था तो उन्होंने इनिशिएटिव लिया और एक टास्क फोर्स बनाया जिसके मेंबर लॉरेंस साइमन भी थे, और उन्होंने उसमें चर्चा करके ये तय किया कि जो कोड है ब्रांडाइज यूनिवर्सिटी में, जहाँ डिस्क्रिमिनेशन is considered to be wrong on the basis of race, color, gender, ethnicity, religion, उसमें कास्ट को भी इंक्लूड करे, और उन्होंने कास्ट को इंक्लूड किया है। और उसका कहना है कि अब ब्रांडाइज तो पहली यूनिवर्सिटी थी, लेकिन अब जो है वो काफ़ी फैल चुका है। बहुत सारी यूनिवर्सिटी में उनके कोड में कास्ट को इंक्लूड किया, हार्वर्ड है, ब्राउन है, कैलिफोर्निया है। तो वहाँ तक कि वो सीमित नहीं रहा, तो वहाँ के जो लोकल गवर्नमेंट है, फॉर एग्जांपल सिएटल में जो उनके लोकल म्यूनसिपैलिटी है, उन्होंने भी अपने जो कोड है उसमें कास्ट को इंक्लूड किया। अब कैलिफोर्निया में प्रयास चल रहा है कि कास्ट कोड को उसमें ले आए, और उसमें बेसिकली वो एम्प्लॉयमेंट और इससे ताल्लुकात होगा। तो मेरा ख्याल है ब्रांडाइज ने शुरुआत की है, और जिसका असर और यूनिवर्सिटी पे हुआ, और उन्होंने भी धीरे धीरे अपने कोड में कास्ट के इशू को लाया है। उनका ये कहना है कि अब ये मूवमेंट काफ़ी लेवल पे बढ़ी हुई है, और उनको खुशी है कि उन्होंने इनिशिएटिव लिया है। दूसरा, मैंने उनको सवाल पूछा था कि इसकी रिएक्शन भी आ रही है, जो हिंदू इंटरनेशनल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है उसको विरोध कर रही है, ये कह रही है कि हिंदुओं को विक्टिमाइज किया जा रहा है, आइडेंटिफाइड किया जा रहा है। तो उसका जवाब उनको ये था, उनका कहना था कि इस तरह की बात वो सही नहीं है आर्गूमेंट, क्योंकि जब हम रेशियल डिस्क्रिमिनेशन कहते हैं और ब्लैक जो है उसको शिकार होते हैं, और वो रेशियल डिस्क्रिमिनेशन बेसिकली मीन्स कि जो वाइट है वो ब्लैक के डिस्क्रिमिनेशन करता है, तो इसका मतलब ये थोड़ी है कि वाइट कम्युनिटी को अलग से कोई विक्टिमाइज करता है या स्टिग्मेटाइज करता है। वो तो इसी हद तक उसको वाइट से रिलेटेड होता है कि वाइट डिस्क्रिमिनेशन करते हैं। उसी तरह कलर के बारे में है, रेस के बारे में है। तो उनका ये कहना था कि हिंदू कम्युनिटीज़ को कोई हिंदू रिलीजन पे कोई क्रिटिसाइज नहीं कर रहा है, हिंदू रिलीजन को कोई आइसोलेटेड नहीं कर रहा है या स्टिग्मेटाइज नहीं कर रहा है या हिंदू को नहीं कर रहा है। इशू डिस्क्रिमिनेशन का है, इंडिविजुअल डिस्क्रिमिनेशन का भी है। तो उनका कहना है कि उसमें कोई तथ्य नहीं है। ये सारे सवाल का जवाब उन्होंने दिया है। दोस्तों, मुझे लगता है कि हमारा जो डिस्कशन है जो प्रोफेसर लॉरेंस साइमन के साथ हुआ, बड़ा यूज़फुल हुआ है। हमने उनके साथ जो बातें की, वो उन्होंने जो अपने पर्सनल लाइफ का जो उनका अनुभव है एज ए जू, उसको लेके उन्होंने दलितों के लिए इशू कॉज, दलितों का कॉज लिया, कास्ट का इशू लिया। फिर प्रोग्राम भी शुरू किए, एनुअल कॉन्फ्रेंसेस 2 साल के बाद कॉन्फ्रेंसेस अम्बेडकर साहब के ऊपर करते हैं। कास्ट का जर्नल शुरू किया है। दलित स्टूडेंट को एक तरह से प्रायोरिटी भी मिल जाती है। और फिर कास्ट कोड को एजुकेशन इंस्टीट्यूशन लाने में भी उन्होंने बहुत इनिशिएटिव लिया है। तो ये एक बहुत बड़ा जो जर्नी है उनका, जो उन्होंने दलितों के लिए कास्ट के खिलाफ अमेरिका में किया है और अमेरिकन अम्बेडकर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के साथ जुड़े हुए हैं, इसका एक अच्छा अकाउंट हमें एक अच्छे आदमी के थ्रू मिला है। ये हमारी इच्छा थी कि हम उनको आपके सामने प्रेजेंट करें, वो हमने किया है। मैं इसी के साथ ये जो डिस्कशन है खत्म करता हूँ। थैंक यू वेरी मच प्रोफेसर लॉरेंस साइमन for joining us, and lakhs of thousands of people will watch.
Wonderful, wonderful.
We'll get to know you better.
Okay, thank you.